Chapter 10. The Marauder's Map. Madame Pomfrey insisted the keeping Harry in the hospital wing for the rest of the weekend. He didn't argue or complain, but he wouldn't let her throw away the shattered remains of his Nimbus 2000. He knew he was being stupid, knew that the Nimbus was beyond repair, but Harry couldn't help it. He felt as though he had lost one of his best friends. He had a stream of visitors, all intent of cheering him up. Hagrid sent him a bunch of yearly flowers that looked like yellow cabbage, and Ginny Weasley, blushing furiously, turned up with the get well card that she had made herself, which sanctuary unless Harry kept it shut under his bowl of fruit. The Gryffindor team visited again on Sunday morning, this time accompanied by Wood, who told Harry in a hollow, dead sort of voice that he didn't blame him. In the silence, Ron and Hermione left Harry's bedside only at night. Nothing anyone said or did could make Harry feel any better because they knew only half of what was troubling him. He hadn't told anyone about Grimm, not even had Ron and Hermione, because he knew Ron would panic and Hermione would scoff. The fact remained, however, that it had now appeared twice, and both appearances had been followed by near fatal accidents. The first time he had nearly been run over by the night bus, the second fallen 50 feet from his broomstick. Was the Grim going to haunt him until he actually died? Was he going to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder for the best? And then there were the Dementors. Harry felt sick and humiliated every time he thought of them. Everyone said the Dementors were horrible, but no one else collapsed every time they went near one. No one else heard echoes in their head of their dying parents, because Harry knew who had screamed voice belonged to now. He had heard her words, heard them over and over again during the night hours in the hospital wing while he lay awake, staring at the string of moonlight on the ceiling. When the Dementors approached him, he heard the last moments of his mother's life, her attempt to protect him, Harry, from Lord Voldemort, and Voldemort's love before he murdered her. Harry doesn't footful, signing into dreams full of clammy, rotor-handed and petrified bleeding, jerking awake to dwell again on his mother's voice. It was a relief to return to the noise and bustle of the main school on Monday, where he was forced to think about other things, even if he had to endure Draco Malfoy's taunting. Malfoy was almost beside himself with glee at Gryffindor's defeat. He had finally taken off his bandage and celebrated having the full use of both arms again by doing spirited imitation of Harry falling off his broom. Malfoy spent much of their next potion class doing Dementor imitation across the Digon. Ron finally cracked and flung a large slippery crocodile herd at Malfoy, which hit him in the face and caused Snape to take 50 points from Gryffindor. If Snape's teaching defense against the dark art again, I'm skiving off, said Ron as they headed towards Lupin's classroom after lunch. Check who is there. Hermione. Hermione peered around the classroom door. It's okay. Professor Lupin was back at work. It certainly looked as though he had been ill. His old robes were hanging more loosely on him, and there were dark shadows beneath his eyes. Nevertheless, he smiled at the class as they took their seats, and they burst at once into explosion of complaints about Snape's behavior while Lupin had been ill. It's not fair, he was only filling in. Why should he give us homework? We don't know anything about werewolves. Two rolls of parchment. Did you tell Professor Snape we hadn't covered them yet? Lupin asked, following slightly. The hubble broke out again. Yes, but he said we really behind. He wouldn't listen. Two rolls of parchment. Professor Lupin smiled at the look of indignation on everyone's face. Don't worry, I'll speak to Professor Snape. You don't have to do the essay. Oh no, said Hermione, looking very disappointed. I have already finished it. had a very enjoyable lesson. Professor Lupin had brought along a glass box containing a hinky punk, a little one-legged creature who looked as though he were made of wisp of smoke, rather frail and harmless looking. Lords travels into dogs, said Professor Lupin as they took note. You noticed the lantern dangling from his hand. Hope ahead, people follow the light. Then the hinky punk made a horrible squealing noise against the glass. When the bell rang, everyone gathered up their things and headed for the door, Harry among them. But wait a moment, Harry, Lupin called. I had like a word. Harry doubled back and watched Professor Lupin covering the hunky pup's box with a cloth. I heard about the match, said Lupin, turning back to his desk and starting to pile book into his briefcase. And I'm sorry about your broomstick. Is there any chance of fixing it? No, said Harry. The three smashed it to bed. Lupin sighed. I planted the Whomping Willow the same year that I arrived at Hogwarts. People used to play a game trying to get near through to touch the trunk. In the end, a boy called Bravery Goodgon nearly lost an eye, and we were forbidden to go near it. No broomstick would have a chance. Did you hear about the Dementor too? Said Harry with difficulty. Lupin looked at him quickly. Yes, I did. I don't think any of us have seen Professor Dumbledore that angry. They have been growing restless for some time, furious at his refusal to let them inside the ground. I suppose they were the reason you fell. Yes, said Harry. He hesitated and then he questioned. He had to ask burst from him before he could stop himself. Why? Why do they affect me like that? I'm just it has nothing to do a weakness, said Professor Lupin sharply, as though he had read Harry's mind. The Dementor affect you worse than the other because there are horrors in your past that the other don't have. A ray of wintry sunlight fell across the classroom, illuminating Lupin's grey hair and the line on his young face. Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They infest the darkest, filthiest place. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of year around them. Even muggles feel their presence, though they can't see them. Get too near a dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you do something like itself, flawless and evil. You'll be left with nothing but the worst experience in your life and the worst that happened to you. Harry is enough to make anyone fail off their broom. You have nothing to feel ashamed of. When Harry gets near me, Harry stared at Lupin's desk, his throat tight. I can hear Voldemort murdering my mum. Lupin made a sudden motion with his arm as though to grip Harry's shoulder, but thought bitter of it. There was a moment of silence. Then, why did they have to come to the match? Said Harry bitterly. They are getting hungry, said Lupin coolly, shutting his briefcase with a snap. Dumbledore won't let them into the school, so their supply of human prey has dried up. I don't think they could resist the large crowd around the Quidditch field. All that excitement, emotion running high, it was their idea of a feast. Azkaban must be terrible, Harry muttered. Lupin nodded grimly. The fortress is set on the tiny island way out to sea, but they don't need walls and waters to keep the prisoner in, not when they are all trapped inside their own heads, incapable of single cheerful thought. Most of them go mad with weeks, but Cyrus Black escaped from them, Harry said slowly. He got away. Lupin's briefcase slipped from the desk. He had to stop quickly to catch it. Yes, he said, straightening up. Black must have found a way to fight them. I wouldn't have believed it possible. Dementors are supposed to drain a wizard of his power if he is left with them too long. You made that Dementor on this train back off, said Harry suddenly. There are certain defense ones can use, said Lupin, but there was only one Dementor on the train. The more there are, the more difficult it to resist. What defense, said Harry at once. Can you teach me? I don't pretend to be an expert at fighting Dementors, Harry. Quite contrary, but if the Dementor come to another quick match, I need to be able to fight them. Lupin looked into Harry's determined face, hesitated, then said, well, alright. I try to help, but it will have to wait until next term. I'm afraid I have a lot to do before the holiday. I choose a very inconvenient time to fall ill. What with the promise of anti-dementor lesson from Lupin, the thought that he might never have to hear his mother's death again, and the fact that Ravenclaws flattened Hufflepuff in their quick match at the end of November, Harry's mood took a definite upturn. Gryffindor were not out of the running after all, although they could not afford to lose another match, would become repossessed of his manic energy and worked his team as harder as ever in the chilly haze of rain that persisted into December. Harry saw no hint of the Dementor within the ground. Dumbledore's anger seemed to be keeping them at their station at the entrance. 2 weeks before the end of the term, the sky lightened suddenly to the dazzling, outlined white and muddy ground were revealed one morning covered in glittering forest. Inside the castle, there was a buzz of Christmas in the air. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, had already decorated his classroom with shimmering lights that turned out to be real fluttering fairies. The students were all happy discussing their plans for the holidays. Ron and Hermione had decided to remain at Hogwarts, and Ron said it was because he couldn't stand 2 weeks with Percy, and Hermione insisted she needed to use the library. Harry wasn't fooled; they were doing it to keep him company, and he was very grateful to everyone's delight. Except Harry's there was to be another Hogsmeade trip on the very last week of the term. We can do all our Christmas shopping there, said Harmony. Mom and Dad would really love those two flossing instruments from Hognidam. Resigned to the fact that he would be the only third year staying behind again, Harry borrowed a copy of Which Broomstick from Wood and decided to spend the day ranting up on the different makes. He had been riding one of the school broom at team practice, an ancient shooting star which was very slow and jerky. He definitely needed a new broom of his own. On the Saturday morning of the Hogsmeade trip, Harry bid goodbye to Ron and Hermione, who were wrapped in cloaks and scarves, then turned up to the marble staircase alone and headed back towards Gryffindor's tower. Snow had started to fall outside the window, and the castle was very still and quiet. Past Harry, he turned halfway along the third floor corridor to see Fred and George peering out at him from behind a statue of humpback one-eye witch. What are you doing? Said Harry curiously. How come you are not going to Hogsmeade? We have come to give you a bit of festival cheer before we go, said Fred with a mysterious wink. Come in here. He nodded toward an empty classroom to the left of the one-eyed statue. Harry followed Fred and George. Inside, George closed the door and then turned beaming to look at Harry. Early Christmas present for you, Harry, he said. Fred pulled something from inside his cloak with a flourish and laid it on one of the desks. It was a large, square, very worn piece of parchment with nothing written on it. Harry, suspecting one of Fred and George's jokes, stared at it. What's that supposed to be? This, Harry, is the secret of our success, said George, patting the parchment fondly. It's a wench giving it to you, said Fred. But we decided last night you need greater than ours. Anyway, we know it by our heart, said George. We banquet it to you. We don't really need it anymore. What do I need with a bit of old parchment? Said Harry. A bit of old parchment? Said Fred, closing his eyes with a grimace as though Harry had mortally offended him. Explained George. Well, when we were in our first year, Harry, young, carefree, and innocent, Harry snorted. He doubted whether Fred and George had ever been innocent. Well, more innocent than we are now. We got into a spot of bother with Flinch. We let off a Dumbledore in the corridor and it upset him for some reason. So he hauled us off to his office and started throwing us with usual detention, disembowelment, and we couldn't help noticing a drawer in one of his filing cabinet marked confiscated and highly dangerous. Don't tell me, said Harry, starting to grin. Well, what would you have done? Said Fred, and George caused a diversion by dropping another dung bomb. I wiped the drawer open and grabbed this. It's not as bad as it sounds, said George. We don't reckon Flitch ever found out how to work it. He probably suspected what it was, though, or he wouldn't have confiscated it. And you know how to work it? Oh, yes, said Fred smirkingly. This little beauty taught us more than all the teachers in the school. You are winding me up, said Harry, looking at that old bit of parchment. Oh, are we? Said George. He looked out his wand, touched the parchment lightly, and said, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. And at one thing like began to spread like a spider's web from the point that George's wand had touched. They joined each other, they crisscrossed, then fanned into every corner of the parchment. Then word began to blossom across the top, great curly green words that proclaim Measure bony wortel, cat food and prongs, perverse of yet to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauder's map. It was a map showing every detail of the Hogwarts castle and ground, but the truly remarkable thing were the tiny ink dots moving around it, each label with a name in minuscule writing. Astounded, Harry bent over it. A label dot in the top left corner showed that Professor Dumbledore was pacing his study. The caretaker cat, Miss Norris, was prowling the second floor, and Pius the poltergeist was curiously bouncing around the trophy room. And was Harry's eyes traveled up and down the familiar corridor, he noticed something else. This map shows a set of passages he had never entered, and many of them seemed to lead right into Hogsmeade, said Fred, tracing one of them with his finger. There are 7 in all. Now Flitch knows about these 4. He pointed them out, but we are sure we are the only one who knows about this. Don't bother with the one behind the mirror of the 4th floor. We used it until last winter, but it's cave in complete, blocked, and we don't reckon anyone's ever used this one because the Whomping Willows plant right over the entrance. But this one here, this one led right into cellar of honey dunks. We have used it lots of time, and as you might notice, the entrance is right outside the room through that one-eyed old Cronham. Mooney Wortel, Padfoot, and Prong signed George, patting the heading of the map. We owe them so much. Noblemen work tirelessly to help a new generation of lawbreakers, said Fred solemnly. Right, said George briskly. Don't forget to wipe it after you have used it, or anyone can read it, Fred said warmingly. Just tap it again and say, Mischief man, and it will go blank. So, young Harry, said Fred in an uncanny impersonation of Percy, mind you behave yourself. See you in Honeyduck, said George, winking. They left with the room, both smickering in a satisfied sort of way. Harry stood there, gazing at the miraculous map. He watched the tiny ink. Mrs. Norris turned left and paused to sniff at something off the floor. If Flinch really didn't know, he wouldn't have to pass the Dementor at all. But even as he stood there, flooded with excitement, something Harry had once heard Mr. Weasley say came floating out of his memory. Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. This map was one of those dangerous magical objects Mr. Weasley had been warning against, yet for magical mischief makers, but then Harry reasoned he only wanted to use it to get into Hogsmeade. It wasn't as though he wanted to steal anything or attack anyone, and Fred and George had been using it for years without anything horrible happened. Harry traced the secret passage to Hogsmeade with his finger, then quite suddenly, as though followed order, he rolled up the map stuffed inside his robes and hurried to the door of the classroom. He opened it a couple of inches. There was no one outside. Very careful, he edged out of the room and behind the statue of the one-eye witch. What did he have to do? He pulled out the map again and saw, to his astonishment, that a new ink figure had reappeared upon it, labeled Harry Potter. This figure was standing exactly where the real Harry was standing, about halfway down the third floor corridor. Harry watched carefully. His little ink self appeared to be tapping the witch with his minute wands. Harry quickly took out his real wand and tapped the statue. Nothing happened. He looked back at the map. The tiniest pitch double had appeared next to his figure. The word inside is Descendium, Descendium. Harry whispered, tapping the stone, which again. At once the statue hump opened wide enough to admit a fairly thin person. Harry glanced quickly up and down the corridor, then tucked the map away again, hoisted himself into the hall, caught fire and pushed himself forward. He slid the considerable way down what felt like a stone slide, then landed on cold, damp earth. He stood up, looking around. It was pitch dark. He held his wand, muttered Lumos, and saw that was in a very narrow lower earth passageway. He raised the map, tapped it with the tip of his wand, and muttered Mischief Magnet. The map went black at once. He folded it carefully, tucked it inside his robe, then heart beating fast, both excited and apprehensive. He set off. The passage twisted and turned more like the burrow of a giant rabbit than anything else. Harry hurried along it, stumbling now and then on uneven floor, holding his wand out in front of him. It looked ages, but Harry had the thought of honey ducks to sustain him. After what felt like an hour, the passage began to rise, patting Harry spread up his face, hot, his feet very cold. 10 minutes later, he came out of the foot of someone worn stone step which rose out of sight above him. Carefully, not to make any noise, Harry began to climb. 100 steps, 200 steps, he lost count as he climbed, watching his feet. Then, without warning, his head hit something hard. It seemed to be a trapdoor. Harry stood there, massaging the top of his head. Listening, he could hear any sound above him. Very slowly, he pushed the trapdoor open and peered over the edge. He was in a cellar, which was full of wooden crates and boxes. Harry climbed out of the trapdoor and replaced it. It blended so perfectly with the dusty floor that it was impossible to tell it was there. Harry crept slowly toward the wooden staircase that led upstairs. Now he could definitely hear voices, not to mention the tinkle of bell and the opening and shutting of the door. Wondering that, he thought to do some. He suddenly heard a door open much closer and had somebody was about to come downstairs and get another box of jelly slug there. They have nearly cleaned us out, said a woman's voice. A pair of feet was coming down the staircase. Harry left behind an enormous crate and waited for the footstep to pass. He heard the man sitting box against the opposite wall. He might not get another chance. Quickly and silently, Harry ducked out from his hiding place and climbed the stair. Looking back, he saw an enormous black side and shiny bald head buried in the box. Harry reached the door at the top of the stair, slipped through it, and found himself behind the counter of Honeydunk. He ducked crept sideways and straightened up. Honey Duck was so crowded with Hogwarts students that no one looked twice at Harry. He egged among them, looking around and suppressed a laugh as he imagined the look that would spread over Dudley's piggy face if he would see where Harry was now. But Harry isn't going to keep it, said Hermione as though the idea were ludicrous. He is going to hand it to Professor McGonagall, aren't you, Harry? No, I'm not, said Harry. Are you mad? Said Ron, goggling at Hermione. Hand in something that good. If I hand it in, I'll have to say where I got it. Flinch would know Fred and George had nicked it. But what about Cyrus Black? Hermione hissed. He could be using one of the passages on that map to get into the castle. The teachers have got to know. He can't be getting in through a passage, said Harry quickly. There are 7 secret tunnels on the map, right? Fred and George reckon Flight already know about 4 of them, and of the other 3, one of them caved in, so no one can get through it. One of them is got the whomping willow planted over the entrance, so you can't get it out of it. And one I just came through. Well, it is really hard to see that entrance to it down in the cellar, so unless he knew it was there. Harry hesitated. What is Black did know the passage was there. Ron, however, cleared his throat significantly and pointed to a notice pasted on the inside of the sweatshop door. By order of the Ministry of Magic, customers are reminded that until further notice, Dementor will be patrolling the street of Hogsmeade every night after sundown. This measure has been put in the place for the safety of Hogsmeade's residents and will be lifted upon the recapture of Cyrus Black. It is therefore advisable that you complete your shopping way before nightfall. Merry Christmas. See, said Ron quietly. I had liked to see Black try to the break into Hogney Dung with Dementor swearing all over the village. Anyway, Harmony, the Honey Duck's owner would be here a break in wouldn't they? They live over the shop, yes, but Harmony seemed to be struggling to find another problem. Look, Harry still shouldn't be coming into Hogsmeade. He hasn't got a signed form. If anyone find out, he'll be in so much trouble, and it's not nightfall yet. What if Cyrus Black turned up today? Now he had have a job spotting Harry in this, said Ron, nodding through the mullioned window at the thick swirling snow. Come on, Harmony, it's Christmas. Harry deserves a break. Hermione bit her lip, looking extremely worried. Are you going to report me? Harry asked her, grinning. Oh, of course not. But honestly, Harry, seeing the fizzing vibes, Harry, said Ron, gabbling him and leading him over their barrel and the jelly slug and acid pops. Did give me one of those when I was 7. It burnt a hole right through my tongue. I remembered Mum walloping him with her broomstick. Ron stared broodingly into acid pop box. Reckoned Fred's take a bit of cockroach cluster if I told him they weren't peanut. When Ron and Hermione had paid for all their sweets, the 3 of them left Honey Ducks for blizzard outside. Hogsmeade looked like a Christmas card, said the little thatched cottage and shop were all covered in a layer of crisp snow. There were holly wreaths on the door and string of enchanted candles hanging in the tree. Harry shivered. Unlike the other 2, he didn't have his clock. They headed up the street, headed down against the window. Ron and Hermione shouting through their scarves at the post office. Zonko is up there. We could go up to the shrinking shack. Tell you what, said Ron, his teeth chattering. Shall we go for a butt rubber in 3 broomsticks? Harry was more than willing. The wind was fierce and his hands were freezing, so they crossed the road and in a few minutes were entering a tiny inn. It was extremely crowded, noisy, warm, and smoky. A cow sort of woman with a pretty face was serving a bunch of rowdy warlock up at the bar. That's Madame Rosemarta, said Ron. I'll get the drink, shall I? He added, going slightly red. Harry and Hermione made their way to the back of the room, where there was a small vacant table between the window and a handsome Christmas tree which stood next to the fireplace. Ron came back 5 minutes later, carrying three flaming tankards of what butterball. Merry Christmas, he said happily, raising his tankard. Harry drank deeply. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted and seemed to hit every bit of him from the inside. A sudden breeze ruffled his ear. The door of the three broomstick had opened again. Harry looked over the rim of his tankard and chalked. Professor McGonagall and Flitwick had just entered the pub with a flurry of snowflakes, shortly followed by Hagrid, who was deep in conversation with a portly man in a lime green bowler hat and a pinstripe cloak. Cornelius Fudge, Ministry of Magic. In an instant, Ron and Hermione had both placed hand on the top of Harry's head and forced him off his stool and under the table, dripping with butterbeer and crouched out of sight. Harry clutched his empty tankard and watched the teachers and first feet move forward. The bar paused, went turned and walked right toward him. Somewhere above him, Hermione whispered, Mobularius. The Christmas tree beside their table rose a few inches off the ground, drifted sideways, and landed with a soft thump right in front of their table, hiding them from view. Staring through the dense lower branches, Harry saw four sets of chair legs move back from the table right beside their, then heard the grunt and sigh of the teachers and ministry as they sat down. Next, he saw another pair of feet wearing sparkle, turquoise high heels, and heard a woman's voice. A small gilly water. Mine, said Professor McGonagall's voice. Four pint of mulled mead. Ta Rosemarta, said Hagrid. A cherry syrup and soda with ice and umbrella, said Professor Flitwick, smacking his lips. So you'll be the red currant drum minister? Thank you, Rosemarta, my dear, said Fudge's voice. Lovely to see you again. I must say, have you used one yourself, won't you? Come and join us. Well, thank you very much, Minister. Harry watched the glittering heel march away and back again. His heart was pounding uncomfortable in his throat. Why hadn't it occurred to him that this was the last week of term for the teachers too, and how long were they going to sit there? He needed time to sneak back into Honeydukes if he wanted to return to school tonight. Hermione's leg gave a nervous twinge next to him. So what brings you to this neck of the wood, Minister? Came Madame Rosemarta's voice. Harry saw the lower part of Fudge's thick body twist in his chair as though he were checking the eavesdropper. Then he said in a quiet voice, What else, my dear, but Cyrus Black? I dare say you heard what happened up at the school at Halloween. I did hear a rumor, admitted Madame Rosemarta. Did you tell the whole pub, Hagrid? Said Professor McGonagall exasperately. Do you think Black's still in the area, Minister? Whispered Madame Rosemarta. I'm sure of it, said Fudge shortly. You know that the Dementor have searched the whole village twice, said Madame Rosemarta, a slight edge to her voice. Scare all my customers away. It's very bad for business, Minister. Rosemarta, my dear, I don't like them any more than you do, said Fudge uncomfortably. Necessary precautions, unfortunate, but there you are. I have just made some of them. You are in a fury against Dumbledore. He won't let them inside the castle ground. I should think not, said Professor McGonagall sharply. How are we supposed to teach with those horrors floating around? Here, here, squeaked tiny Professor Flitwick. whose feet were dangling a foot from the ground. All the same, demurred Fudge, they are here to protect you all from something much worse. We all know what Black capable of. Do you know I still have trouble believing it, said Madame Rose Marta thoughtfully. Of all the people to go over to the dark side, Cyrus Black was the last I had have thought. I mean, I remember him when he was a boy at Hogwarts. If you had told me then what he was going to become, I had have said you had had too much mead. You don't know that half of it, Rose Marta, said Fudge gruffly. The worst he did isn't widely known. The worst, said Madame Rose Marta, her voice alive with curiosity, was when murdering all those poor people. You mean I certainly do, said Fudge. I can't believe that could possibly be worse. You say you remember him at Hogwarts, Rose Marta, murmured Professor McGonagall. Do you remember who his best friend was? Naturally, said Madame Rose Marta with a small laugh. Never saw one without the other, did you? The number of times I had them in here. Oh, they used to make me laugh. Quite the double act, Cyrus Black and James Potter. Harry dropped his tankard with a loud clunk. Ron kicked him precisely, said Professor McGonagall. Black and Potter, ringleader of their little gang, both very bright, of course, exceptionally bright, in fact, but I don't think we'll ever sack such a pair of troublemakers. I don't know, chuckled Hagrid. Fred and George Weasley could give me a run for their money. You had have thought Black and Potter were brothers. Professor Flitwick, inseparable. Course they were, said Fudge. Potter cursed Fred Black beyond all his other friends. Nothing changed when they left school. Black was best man when James married Lily. They named him godfather to Harry. Harry has no idea, of course. You can imagine how the idea would torment him because Black turned out to be in league with you know who. Whispered Madame Rose Marta. Worse even than that, my dear. Fudge broke his voice and proceeded in a sort of low rumble. Not many people are aware that the Potter you know who was after then Dumbledore, who was of course working tirelessly against you know who, had a number of useful spies. One of them tripped him off, and he alerted James and Lily at once. He advised them to go into hiding. Well, of course, you know who wasn't as easy person to hide from. Dumbledore told them that their best chance was the Fiddler's charm. How does that work? Said Madame Rose Marta breathlessly with interest. Professor Flitwick cleared his throat. An immensely complex spell, he said squeakily, involving the magical concealment of secret inside a single living soul. The information is hiding inside the chosen person or secret keeper and is henceforth impossible to find unless, of course, the secret keeper choose to divulge it. As long as the secret keeper refused to speak, you know who would search the village where Lily and James were staying for years and never find them, not even if he had his nose pressed against their sitting room window. So Black was the Potter's secret keeper, whispered Madame Rose Marta. Naturally, said Professor McNagall. James Potter told Dumbledore that Black would die rather than tell where they were, that Black was planning to go into hiding himself, and yet Dumbledore remained worried. I remember him offering to be the Potter secret keeper himself. He suspected Black, gasped Madame Rose Marta. He was sure that somebody close to the Potter had been keeping you know who informed of their movements, said Professor McGonagall darkly. Indeed, he had suspected for some time that someone of our side had turned traitor and was passing a lot of information to you know who. But James Potter insisted on using Black. He did, said Fudge heavily, and then, barely a week after the Fiddler's charm had been performed, Black betrayed them, breathed Madame Rose Marta. He did indeed. Black was tired of his double agent role. He was ready to declare his support openly for you know who, and he seemed to have planned this for the moment of the Potter's death. But as we all know, you know who met his downfall in a little Harry Potter, power gone, horrible weekend. He fled and is left Black in a very nasty position indeed. His master had fallen at a very moment when he Black had shown his true color, and traitor, he had no choice but to run for it, fifty skin. Concord Hagrid said so loudly that half the bar went quiet. Shh, said Professor McGonagall. I met him, growled Hagrid. I must be the last to see him before he killed all those people. It was me what rescued Harry from Lily and James' house after they was been killed. Just got him out to run, poor little thing, with a great slash across their forehead, and his parents dead, and Siren's Black turned up on the flying motorbike he used to ride. Never occurred to me what he was doing there. I didn't know he had been Lily and Jem's secret keeper. Thought he had just heard news of you know who attack and come to see what he could do. White and shaking he was, and you know what I did? I confronted the murdering traitor. Hagrid roared. Hagrid, please, said Professor McGonagall, keep your voice down. How was I to know he wasn't upset about Lily and James? It was you know who he had care about. And then he said, give Harry to me. Hagrid, I am his godfather. I'll look after him. Ha! But I had me orders from Dumbledore, and I told back. No, Dumbledore said Harry was to go to his uncle and aunt's place argue, but in the end of he gave him and told me to take his motorbike to get Harry there. I won't need it anymore, he says. I shouldn't know there was something fishy going on then. He loved that motorbike. What was he giving to me for? Why wouldn't he need it anymore? Fact was, it was too easy to trace. Dumbledore knew he had been the Potter's secret keeper. Black knew he was going to have to run for it. Knight knew it was a matter of hours before the ministry was after him. But what if I had given Harry to him? I bet he had have pitched him off the bike halfway out to see his best friend's son. But when a wizard goes over to the dark side, there is nothing and no one that matters to them anymore. A long silence followed Hagrid's story. Then Madame Rosemarta said with some satisfaction, but he didn't manage to disappear, did he? The Ministry of Magic caught up with him next day. Alas, if only we had, said Fudge bitterly. It was not we who found him, it was little Peter Pettigrew, another of Potter's friend, maddened by grief, no doubt, and knowing that Black had been the Potter's secret keeper. He went after Black himself. Pettigrew, that fat little boy who was always tagging around after them at Hogwarts, said Madame Rosemarta. Hero worshipped Black and Potter, said Professor McGonagall. Never talent-wise, I was often rather sharp with him. You can imagine how I regret that now. She sounded as though she had a sudden head cold. There now, Minerva said first kindly. Pettigrew died a hero's death. I witnessed Muggles, of course. We wiped their memories later, told us how Pettigrew conquered Black. They say he was sobbing. Lily and Jem Cyrus, how could you? And then he went for his wand. Well, of course, Black was quicker, blew Pettigrew to Smith ears. Professor McGonagall blew her nose and said quickly, stupid boy, foolish boy, he was always hopeless at dueling. Should have left it to the ministry. I tell you, if I had got to Black before little Pettigrew, I did, I wouldn't have messed around with wands. I had have ripped off limbs from limbs, Hagrid growled. You don't know what you are talking about, Hagrid, said Fudge sharply. Nobody but trained hit wizard from the magical law enforcement square would have stood a chance against Black once he was concerned. I was junior minister. in the Department of Magical Catastrophe at the time, and I was one of the first on the time. Since after Black murdered all those people, I will never forget it. I still dream about it sometimes. I cried in the middle of the street, so deep it had cracked the stair below, bodies everywhere, muddled screaming, and Black standing there laughing with what was left of Pettigrew in front of him, a heap of blood-stained robes and a few fragments. First voice stopped abruptly. There was the sound of five noses being blown. Well, there you have it, Rose Marta said first thickly. Black was taken away by 20 members of the magical law enforcement squad and Pettigrew received order to Marilyn first class, which I think was some comfort to his poor mother. Black's been in Azkaban ever since. Madame Rose Marta let out a long sigh. Is it true he is mad, Minister? I wish I could say that. He was, said first slowly. I certainly believe his master defeated unhide him for a while. The murder of Pettigrew and all those muggles was the action of author and desperate man. Cruel, pointless. Yet I met Black on last inspection of Azkaban. You know, most of the prisoners in there sit muttering or to themselves in the dark. There is no sense in them. I was shocked at how normal Black seemed. He spoke quite rational to me. It was unerring. You had have thought he was merely bored. Asked I finished with my newspaper cool as you please said he missed doing the crossword. Yes, I was astounded at how little effect the Dementors seemed to be having on him, and he was one of the most heavily guarded in the place. You know Dementors outside his door day and night, but what do you think he's broken out to do? Said Madame Rose Marta. Good gracious, Minister, he isn't trying to rejoin. You know who he is. Ideally, that is eventually planned, said Fudge evasively, but we hope to catch Black long before that. I must say, you know who along and friendless is one thing, but give him Black his most devoted servant, and I shudder to think how quickly he will rise again. There was a small cheek of glass on wood. Someone had set down their glass. You know, Cornelis, if you are dining with the headmaster, we had better head back up to the castle, said Professor McNeville. One by one, the parents of feet in front of Harry took the weight of their owners once more. Hymns of clocks swung into sight, and Madame Rose Marta glittering heel disappeared behind the bar. The door of the three broomstick opened again. There was another fury of snow, and the teachers had disappeared. Harry, Ron, and Hermione's face appeared under the table. They were both staring at him, lost for words. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see ya. Bye bye.